Okay. Well, tonight we're really pleased. We've got both of the invasive plant volunteer removal gurus from Arlington and Alexandria with us. And the Alexandria person is going to speak first. Eileen Grant is a longtime tree steward, and she actually got her job in Alexandria because she'd been working in the neighborhood, removing invasive and caring for the trees. So Eileen's going to talk about what goes on in Alexandria and how those of you that are interested in volunteering there can get involved. So Eileen, take it away.
Okay. Hi, I'm Eileen. So Nora asked me to just sort of say kind of how I got into this and how what I'm doing with it. I'm probably like all of you. I grew up climbing trees. I actually even majored in natural resource management at Virginia Tech, but I never did anything with my degree, so I was on the side. Um, we moved to this house in Alexandria in 2004, and it's across the street from a little park, 6-acre park, that I had, when my husband and I were dating, I had run around this park and I thought, oh, who lives here? They're so lucky to live here. And then we, fortunate enough, found a house on this it's a dead end street. So we moved here. I still had little kids. Around 2010, I started thinking, gosh, I don't know many trees. And through lots of different things, I found tree stewards. I became a tree steward in 2014. And then, you start understanding about invasives and you understand about, parks and large parks, landscape parks get, lots of help from either the county or the city. But these little teeny ones or the edges don't as much. And this was one that was totally ignored. It was covered with mostly ivy, but lots of invasives. So and Nora was at one of the first ones that we had. We had some ivy removal days here, and the city started taking notice that we were now taking notice, and they started helping us, so to speak. And then they sent in IPC, which is the invasive plant control people, and they actually did a massive removal because the ivy was just awful. But now the park is really pretty nice. It's great. But now there's lots of little teeny parks that are connected to it that we're sort of starting to work on. And I remember at one point, so I live in the city. I wasn't working for the city or anything, but I remember one day we were doing some kind of volunteer thing, and the city guy who now I have his job, but he was the tech. He brought gloves and pruning shears or something to my house because we had a group of 15 people coming, and I thought I want his job. So I just a year or so later heard that they had taken his job. This was Scott Graham. They'd taken his job and divided it into 3 jobs that were all part. There's 3 of us that are part time. So I applied for it, and I got. So I'm a natural resource technician in Alexandria, which really it sounds cool. It's a great name, but really all I do is I remove invasive plants. I help Boy Scouts plant trees. I do whatever they ask. I'm sure the same with you, Jen. You just there's something needs to be done, and you send the tech out to do it. We're pretty low on the totem pole. Like, it's not. Jen's job is great. She has the name job. I'm not even on a list anywhere. People go, I can't find you on the listing. I'm like, you're right, I'm not on there. But I love it because I can go in, I can just work with, like our neighborhood, we're now starting to plant trees. We cleaned up another area at the end of the park that it was covered with invasives. And Rod, my boss, is giving us some trees to plant. If you come on the 20th, it's another timber branch park on the other side of the graveyard. You will see this little teeny park. Mine is very similar to the one you're going to be working in, which is also covered with invasives. And it's right next to Ivy Hill Cemetery. If we do end up doing a pretty good job in the little park that's there, Ivy Hill Cemetery is literally across the street, and we can go in there. I've already talked to the woman in there, and she said she'd love to have us come in and remove some invasives. And Nora was telling me there are people here in Alexandria who want to do more. This city isn't set up as well as Arlington. Arlington really has gotten a good system going. And so if you are interested in doing something in Alexandria, um, contact me. Like I'm on the list, or yeah, whatever. I can put it in the chat if you want. Just contact me and we can figure out what to do, and I can maybe get through to Rod. He did answer my email. I was telling Nora, he hardly ever answers my emails, but he answered my emails the other day. So I'm joking here. He does answer my emails, but he's kind of busy doing other things. But please contact me. I love working out. I like um, getting rid of the ivy, getting rid of all the other stuff that we're trying to get rid of. And yeah, and if you have some area that you would like to become, to make it better, like kind of what I did, I think when these little neighborhood things get going, the city does start taking notice and they will start sending people in to help out. So does anybody have any questions? My yard. Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, if we do some park thing, if you want to go into somebody's yard for a bit, that would be fine. But yeah, I'll put it.
What is the name of the park that you first went to?
It's called Timber Branch Park. It's
Thank you.
Okay, it's off of Braddock Road. It's about 6 acres. It has a little stream running through the middle of it. So it's surrounded by roads and houses, and then there's a little park with a stream in it. And I will put in the chat.
Eileen, I put your grand fling at AOL.com.
Okay. Yeah.
It's in the chat.
Okay, great. So either AOL or Gmail, they both work, and you can. So anyway, I'm not looking at the chat. Are you going to ask me the questions, somebody, or do you want me to look at the chat? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Eileen, this is Joe. There's a question. Do you work just on public land?
So technically, yes. Occasionally, for instance, Ivy Hill, we have done some things in Ivy Hill. Like Rod has a really good relationship with Lucy Godden, who's kind of running the Ivy Hill, Friends of Ivy Hill. And he has done some things in there that we've gone in and done. I'm trying to think, where else have we gone? Yeah, and one time we did something with St. Agnes St. Stephen's on the hillside, on the side of it, St. Agnes St. Stephen's, which is a private school. But we were working with some of the kids. It was sort of like a volunteer thing, and we were helping them. So occasionally, if something asks us and it goes through him and he approves it, but I don't think they go into someone's yard. I think it would be Ivy Hill, yes. If you've ever been by St. Stephen's on Russell Road, that whole hill there is full of invasives. And we did a little thing with the kids there once. But yeah, it's mostly public lands. Yeah, because we work for the city. So
I'll just throw in that in Arlington, it's pretty much the same. Like we can give advice or like help organize volunteer events on non-public land. Like if a group of people want to volunteer like on a church property, we'll support that,
Yes, same.
And everybody, but we won't come in and do it ourselves for them or pay a contractor to do the work. Or anything.
Right. Same. So, I mean, we want to encourage this community engagement. And so we don't want to, like close the door to that, but you're right. I don't go into private lands and just do this. No. So.
Okay. I hope everyone can hear now. Some people were having a little problem hearing. And Jen solved her problem by signing off and logging back on. So if you're still having problems hearing people, you might try that. Okay. Any more questions for Eileen before we let her go do a ghost tour?
Okay.
What's scarier, ghosts or invasives?
Okay, well, in all honesty, there's no kids on this. I don't really believe in ghosts, so the invasives are way scarier. But when I have a group of kids, I try to scare them with. I'm not the best ghost tour giver. I'm more into the history of it all, but there's a couple of good stories you guys should come and take it. There's a couple good stories that are, they're pretty interesting. I always try to include history, and I see the kids' eyes glaze over, like, oh. I mostly do these 8th grade. I don't know if you guys realize this, but the whole country sends their 8th grade children, except for during COVID, it didn't happen, but they send their 8th grade children to Washington, D.C. for their sort of Washington, D.C. field trip, and they stay here 3 to 5 days, and they slowly have gotten incorporated into these ghost tours because of course it's fun for a bunch of kids. So we have, if you ever go down to Old Town on a weeknight, there is a revolving door of huge buses dropping off kids and picking up kids. So it's lots of 8th grade children, but it's okay. It's kind of fun as long as they're not bad boys. So, all right. So if nobody has any more questions, thank you for letting me talk. Please, please, please contact me. It really did. When I got involved in it, I had no idea about so many things. So if those of you who are new are like, I don't know anything. I didn't know anything. I knew a maple tree. That's about all. I seriously feel like I only knew a maple tree. And so now I know a lot of trees.
Could you remind us of the time of day of your event on Sunday?
Let me look it up on my phone to make sure I tell you the right time. Hold on. So it's at 1. If you're coming, you're gonna probably come down Braddock Road, and you're gonna take a right or a left on a Ruffner, and you'll come. Hopefully, that's what GPS will bring you down, and it doesn't dead end there. But you can only take a left at the end of the street, and right there is where it is. So there's a park, and then there's 2 streets on either side of it. So please park on the side of the street near the houses, not on the park side. There's really no place to park on the park side. Or on the far right is where the cemetery is. You can park there. You guys, I think, figure it out. It's fine. I'll be down there early to make sure I don't want the people who live down there to feel blocked in. It's a pretty squishy area, but just park on the house part near the houses, not near the park. It's kind of obvious when you get there. You'll see.
Okay.
And I'd say there's a stream running through it. Bring shoes that you don't mind getting wet in case you get down into the stream. Bring long sleeves. There's lots of multiflora rose, a lot of long sleeves, gloves, shoes that you can go in the water with. You might not end up in the water, but in case you do, just make sure you wear stuff that you can, that you can not worry about getting wet. Okay. So I hope to see some of you. This park is a little teeny tiny thing. This one's tinier than mine that you're gonna work in. So anyway, okay.
I mean, and maybe you guys all already learned this at another event, but is there a place like, if people want to volunteer doing this work in Alexandria, is it just that you'll send notices to the tree steward listserv, or is there a place they should look, or how do they know? Does it go on the tree steward event calendar? How do they know about them?
So we're not as organized as you are, and I've said this a number of times, but I maybe should take the gauntlet, so to speak, and because the way I kind of got into it was I just was like, okay, here's a park, it needs help. I started getting people to help me, and it kind of grew. There are people who, like, for instance, I know Paul, and 2 classes ago, got a group of tree stewards, and they went into Ivy Hill, and they just, they sent it to the tree steward list, and he was kind of doing that as maybe his project, or he just wanted to do it. That's how it's done now. I mean, it sounds awful that it's not more organized. I don't feel Rod tamps down on that a bit. He's extraordinarily careful about letting people just kind of wander in the woods. He doesn't even he gets like upset with me if I'm like, well, why don't we do this? No, you can't do that. Okay. So you just have to kind of go with the flow of it. But seriously, I think what Nora was saying, it really might help if somebody was coming to me and said, look, here, I want to do this park. How do I start get going? I could at least give my idea. If they know a couple of their neighbors, like what we did was we literally tacked up, we just walked around the neighborhood and tacked it up on the trees saying, we're going to meet on this day. We did a tree walk, and I did this back in the fall of this year, because, COVID stopped everything. And 30 people showed up. I was kind of shocked. And now they're going to come help me plant these trees. Now, we had done the first one so many years ago that a lot of those people already moved away, but that's sometimes the way to do it. Very grassroots. You just get a group of people who live there, who are interested. They want this park to be fixed up. Try to get that group sort of organized. Put notes on the trees. They don't have to say their email is going to be sold to anybody, and just tell them to show up if they can. And you're right. Then it requires us to be very organized with, either sign up sheets so there's no, suing or any of that stuff going on. And maybe providing gloves or something. But you're right, it's not as well organized. It could.
No, there's just
No,
different
I
ways to
appreciate you
approach
asking,
it.
and
I think they
I'm
both
answering
have
it
value,
seriously.
you know, so I,
Yeah, so that doesn't help much, but that's the answer.
didn't know if there was a place I should send people. So.
I guess for now, to me, I mean, Mary Farah also will take some things where people will, but both of them, I think both Mary and Rod are pretty busy. But me, I have another guy that I work with, Jim, and we you know, we go into parks and stuff together, and we would encourage people to come and work with us. We just have to be more open about how we do it. And I should probably announce that in the tree steward list that when we do it. But we tend to go, are you available today? Is it not raining? Can you meet me at 11? I mean, it's very last minute when we all, like tomorrow we're going to meet. So anyway, any more questions? Because I am going to have to.
That's it.
I'm sorry to miss your
No,
presentation.
no worries. I didn't mean to hold you here.
No, you didn't. You didn't. Okay. Well, anyway, have a nice rest of your meeting. Yeah.
Thank you, Eileen.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, next up, we're going to hear from Alexandria. So, not Alexandria, I'm sorry, Arlington. I'm getting my A's mixed up. So Jennifer, you want to take it away?
All right. I'm going to share my screen in a second, but I'll just,
Okay.
well, you can all still see my lovely face, you know, say thank you all for being here, for participating in the Tree Steward program. My dad actually participated in this, you know, 20 years ago or something, no longer active, but you know, it's been around for a really long time and made a tremendous difference. And some of the earliest parks where we've dealt with invasives and other stewardship issues, you know, people like Nora who were tree stewards or people like Joe are really critical to the work we're doing. So I just want to thank you all for becoming part of that community, whether or not you become avid invasive removers or, you know, focus your energy on other aspects of tree care. So with that, let me see if I can. I guess one question I want to ask before we get started is I know that Jim mentioned invasive insect species at the presentation last week. Is that?
Yes, he did. He went over it. Of course, if you go ahead over them, you know, telling us twice doesn't hurt.
I tried to keep that out of what I have, so I don't think I duplicated your effort. And then the other question I guess I just had is if people, I don't know if there's to get a sense of people, especially those who are becoming tree stewards, would you say you already could identify like 5 invasive plants, or are people really coming to this as beginners who are like, oh, I didn't know what a maple tree was? I mean, people can be at all levels, but just to get.
Well, Jim,
you know.
there are 45 new tree stewards. Some of them are already master naturalists,
Okay.
but a lot of them are absolutely newbies. So start at the newbie site. And I will let you know that the link to the all of Arlington's RIP programs, Remove Invasive Plants, is on our calendar. So anytime they go to our event calendar to see what's happening, they can be referred straight into yours. So
Okay.
we got that going at least.
Yeah. And I need to work on, I always need to work on my own event calendar. So yes, let me go ahead and feel free to, you know, if put questions in the chat. I'll try to pause at various times, but I won't be able to see you if you raise your hand or anything like that. So if you put things in the chat, Joe can interrupt me if I haven't not pausing when I need to. So do you guys actually see my screen right now? Somebody could just let me know. Maybe you're all laughing at Groundhog Day. I don't know. I was at Groundhog Day before COVID, and somebody found the picture recently and sent it up. So again, here to focus on invasive plants, and I could talk about the impact invasive plants have on more than trees, but I will have to mention the forest, but I will try to also tie it to trees as appropriate. So I just want to lead off with this. You know, this was a cartoon in the Washington Post a while ago. So just awareness of this as an issue, that invasive species as something that impacts trees, is definitely becoming something that is not, everybody knows about, but almost everybody is aware of it, even if they can't label them as invasives and just think of them as vines. So especially, as you become tree stewards and you're seen as this, important resource, a more respected, knowledgeable source in your community, somebody your neighbors or people in your, community groups might talk to about these issues. It's definitely good for you to be aware of this, because even, like I say, at the popular level, it's starting to sort of, awareness is growing. So basically, to begin, not all plants are equal in an ecological sense. We have our native plants. We have some non-native plants, which are perfectly lovely parts of our lives. And then we have some invasive plants, which, as a sort of special category of non-native plants. So an invasive plant is a non-native plant that does environmental or ecological harm. So this is a plant, or human health, that's things like that that giant hogweed that could give you sunburn. So basically this is a plant that is not part of our natural occurring community. Poison ivy is part of our native plant community. So even though it may cause harm and give us itches, it's not invasive. But a species that is not part of the naturally occurring plant community in the area and is causing actual damage is considered invasive. A lot of times people will refer to them as non-native invasives, just to kind of clarify that. And a lot of other terms have been used over the last 10 or 20 years. If you don't know what invasive plants are, anytime you see a mound of vines that have smothered every tree and bush in the area and oops, devoured it, that's probably an invasive plant. There are some aggressive native vines, but in this particular case, this is kudzu along the W&D. And there's probably a little porcelain berry mixed in there too. All right, they have, one of the reasons that they are invasive is that they do have a lot of competitive advantages. These are not just, and sometimes we've deliberately selected and brought the plants here because of those advantages. That make them more competitive. They may produce lots and lots of seeds, which may mean they're producing lots of fruit or lots of flowers, so it may be more attractive to us. They often green up, they leaf out earlier in the spring. So in the next couple of weeks, if you see something green in the woods, a green bush in the woods, it's very likely to be invasive. So they leaf out earlier, they're getting that sunlight before our native plants can get it. A lot of them are not, because they're not locally native or even native to the region or perhaps the country, they didn't evolve here in a balanced relationship with all the things that would keep them in check. There's nothing that eats them. There's no herbivory, or if it's an animal species, maybe there's no predation. They're released from that pressure. And then they're prolific. Some of them will, put a lot of the release chemicals into the environment around them, allelopathic. I don't know if you talked about walnuts and other species like that suppress the growth of other plants around them by releasing allelopathic chemicals into the soil to suppress the growth of other plants. Some of our native plants do that as well. So like you'll never, if you look at all the ivy leaves out there, or wherever you see English ivy, there may be damage to it, physical damage from somebody stepping on it, but you'll never see where a caterpillar that's going to grow up to become a moth or butterfly or something has been nibbling on it. So a lot of different advantages they have that make them become such a problem in our community. A lot of times, yeah, again, people are looking for something that grows fast, spreads rapidly, lots of berries, not eaten by bugs. Well, it's actually not a good thing in the long run in our natural systems. So they're brought from other areas. They don't have any benefit to our native species that depend on those long interactions to learn how to eat each other. And then once they're established, they grow and spread really, really rapidly. And so just to sort of, if you're talking to people about this who don't care about trees and don't care about the environment, invasive species do impact people who that's just not even part of what they're thinking about. A lot of times this might be more of an invasive, you know, insect pest or pathogen, but, and I'm not going to read this whole story out loud, but these species are impacting, you know, our agricultural systems as well as our natural system. So even those people who don't really care about the forest may care about their wine, their orange juice, their maple syrup, things like that. So for an ecological perspective, it's a real threat to our plant communities, which are long-standing, diverse communities with all these interactions fine-tuned among each other. Just reducing the species diversity and eventually replacing it with a monoculture. There's the impacts to the tree canopy that comes along with that. The impacts to the regeneration of the forest. Seedlings can't get through thickets or dense colonies of invasive plants. And then when you lose your plant community, you're losing, you know, the base of the food pyramid. And the more diverse your plant community, the more different kinds of wildlife you can support. And so it's displacing the plants themselves, and then it's displacing the value those plants provide to our wildlife. And then threats to trees, like even if this isn't a tree in the forest or something like that, our trees do, obviously, I'm sure you've learned about all the benefits of trees, all that they do for our, you know, wildlife, as well as all that they do for, you know, climate adaptation, heat islands, just beautifying our homes, everything that they do. So these invasive plants are threats to trees. It's easiest, I think, for us to be aware of the impact that vines and invasive vines have on trees, and they obviously have the greatest impact. They can go up and mature a healthy tree, and they won't kill it that year. They won't kill it in 2 years, but eventually they are weakening the tree and, you know, reducing its lifespan, making it more vulnerable to all the other stresses that our trees in our urban areas experience, you know, whether it's drought or climate change or, you know, just poor compacted soil, limited soil space around homes, like all the stresses that our trees experience. Having a vine on top of you does not help. And then when there are heavy infestations of the vines on the forest floor, that also just makes it hard for these tree seedlings to come up in a more natural environment. And, you know, preserving our contiguous forest is where, like, so many of our trees still are located. And invasive bushes also impact our trees. It's a little less obvious how a bush is impacting a tree, but again, a heavy thicket of certain kinds of invasives can, again, be that smothering thing that don't let the tree seedlings and saplings mature. And again, some of those bushes release chemicals that suppress seed germination. So even if you have an acorn there, it's not going to sprout. And the same thing with some of the herbaceous species, even like a grass can really sort of suppress that regeneration of the forest. And again, some of them do release chemicals that keep things from germinating. So we have a lot of invasive plants in Northern Virginia. Arlington and Alexandria are very heavily developed areas. They are very fragmented areas. They are like these brownies that you can have as all crust. The crust is invasive plants. You know, I think the oven is climate change, and then the crust is invasive plants. We're getting a very overcooked ecosystem. And then they also enjoy like disturbance. They enjoy, you know, they tend to do better with increased carbon in the atmosphere. Unfortunately, a lot of them, especially the vines, they don't have to put the carbon into their trunk and into that kind of like longer term storage. They can just increase rapid growth. And apparently they do better with light pollution too. I just read scientific article about that. So where did all these plants come from? A lot of them were introduced. A lot of them were introduced deliberately because they have attractive qualities. Porcelain berry, English ivy, honeysuckle, chameleon plant. A lot of these plants, yeah, they're attractive, and they seemed like a good idea at the time. I remember seeing an ad for, from the 40s for porcelain berry, and it was like, it'll cover your porch, in a summer, and then you can enjoy the beautiful multicolored berries. and it will cover your porch. Some of them were particularly brought over for erosion control. Some of them were brought over like as a good idea. They thought it would be like, hey, this has a lot of berries. This will be great for wildlife. Let's plant it in clearings in the forest. I guess full confession, my dad has some land outside in like Lexington, Virginia, and we planted some like autumn olive and Lespedeza like 30 years ago there that we got as like, oh, this would be great for wildlife, and we've spent the last 10 years pulling it out. Sometimes stuff was not deliberately planted or introduced. Japanese stiltgrass was classically used as packing material in the days before styrofoam peanuts, because that's a straw around China. And then people, took the China out of the box and just dumped the straw out, as one would, into the natural environment, thinking it would decay. And there were seeds in it and established themselves. So lots of different ways these plants have gotten here. Again, just lots of pathways. Sometimes, again, it's I think no one really knows how wavy leaf basket grass, which came from China, got here, but it could very well have been on the boot of a hike. Somebody went for a hike while they were there and then came back and went for a hike or something like that. So just these things do spread. One thing, it's not the primary vector for invasive plant spreading, but for people who are homeowners or property managers or have influence on property managers, if you wouldn't dump stuff into your neighbor's yard, please don't dump it into your friendly neighborhood park department's yard. It seems like a good idea that they want I think people sometimes think it's easiest. Sometimes they're thinking, oh, it's all organic, natural material. It will decay and return the nutrients, like they're doing a sort of low level composting project or something. And maybe they have good intentions and they're just thinking, oh, this can leave the leaves. I don't want to leave them in my own yard, but we can leave them in the park. Even if it's just leaves, like heavy loads of landscaping material are not the way this should be done. So again, and I have definitely seen cases where the invasive in the park is coming from, and not just spreading on the ground, but is spreading from these piles where people are making little debris piles in our parks. So I'm going to pause here for questions from anybody, and I have a question for you. So any questions? I'm taking that as a...
No questions so far.
Okay. So my question, I guess, for everyone is, I haven't really listed a whole bunch of species here, but just, have you seen this in the parks? And then, like, it's a lot of, like, you almost don't want to know. Like, it's there's a famous article by Mark Twain where he's talking about becoming like a riverboat pilot or something on the Mississippi, and he remembers this beautiful scene he saw when he first had moved out west, and oh, the sun was setting and there was a branch over the leaning over the river and little riffle here in the stream, and it was all beautiful. And then after a couple years of training as a riverboat pilot, I guess, he's like, oh, that branch is going to fall down and be a strainer, and then that riffle means there's a buried rock that's spiking up there that I could run my boat on. And just like everything that had seemed attractive to him, suddenly he was aware of it as like a management issue or as a problem. And this almost the way it is with invasives, you almost don't want to know, because you can never enjoy going for a walk in the area again. You still will enjoy it. I still love being outside in our neighborhoods and in our parks and in the area, but it does impact the way you see things sometimes. And then, you have them in your own yard. That's always, depending on how many you have in your yard, that's always a place that you can maybe directly start making a difference. And what we do in our yard sort of sets expectations and standards for what our community does. And my yard is full of these plants. I will confess, I'm still pulling these invasives out of my own yard. So what we can do about this, there's a lot of different things, and a lot of things that tree stewards in particular can help do. Several years ago, it's probably 8 years ago now, Nora or Joe might remember, the tree stewards contributed to a big campaign, a choking hazard campaign. And this flyer, the choking hazard flyer, is still available. It's a great resource. The other side of it you can't see here, but the other side of this image explains how to take ivy off trees. So it's targeting homeowners who had ivy on their trees and just explaining to them how to remove it. And as I drive around, I do see trees where all the ivy above a certain point is dead, not just in our parks, but in people's yards. So that's a great resource. And the tree stewards really helped create that resource. I believe they funded the creation of it, or jointly funded it with master naturalists or something. I think it was all tree stewards, actually. So then they also, volunteering with local invasive removal events, whether in Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax, and then just being knowledgeable and being able to share awareness of this, and then, learning what not to plant and helping prevent new infestations. So, I already said this.
We do have a question, Jen, if I could interrupt.
Sure.
And this is a great one. Why are nurseries allowed to sell invasives? A friend brought a nankin, perhaps a nandina, from one of the biggest local nurseries. So many other choices. Why can't there be some limits on what can be sold?
So this is being debated at the state legislative level. You may have run into this before in other trainings. Virginia is a Dillon rule state, which means that we can't pass ordinances at a local level unless we've gotten permission to do so at the state level. The state does have, the state, it's frustrating, I know, but I think 5 years ago, the state had no species that were not allowed to be bought and sold. And there was a lot of work by a lot of people pushing for the Virginia's legislature. They created a category of noxious weeds, added a few species to it, but last year it's doubling every year, which sounds exciting, but it was, I think, 6 or 7, and now it's 12 or 13 species are illegal for buying and selling in the state of Virginia. And these are some species that, we don't even have here. We definitely don't want here. Probably no one would ever buy or sell, but I have been surprised that if you go online and Google kudzu, shopping is an option. I can't imagine anybody would buy it, but people do. So they are working every year to expand the number of species on the noxious weed list. There are some bills that have been going through recently trying to just wholesale move large chunks of our invasive species list to the noxious weed list. And there was recently a bill going through that was like to study at least labeling native plants, and then possibly in the future labeling invasive plants, so that consumers could be more aware.
Yes.
So I think that it's different administrations come and go through the state legislature. Progress kind of comes and goes as well, but it is being discussed in the state legislature. They're at least looking to promote the sale of native plants. I think is going to be an easier first step. But if you want to be a volunteer, they need volunteers to. I was contacted by someone, I think it was Glenn Tobin, who volunteers with the Master Naturalist Board, but he was he was filling out this state's form to get something listed as a noxious weed. and it's, you know, a giant form, but you have to fill it all out, provide all this information, pass it on to the committee that mandates things as noxious weeds. But a lot of that work of getting those species listed is done by volunteers, and they always, it's if you don't want to go out in the field and, you know, fight thorny plants where there might be yellow jackets lurking in the undergrowth, and you are able to like push your way through like driving, you know, providing information, writing stuff up. That's another role that is a place of things that volunteers could do. So any other, that was a long way of saying, I don't know why we can't get this stuff listed, but we are working on it at a state and local level.
Question, I can't figure out how to write it.
Oh, go ahead.
Is it possible to remove any of these invasives in a permanent way, or is it just a constant ongoing project that needs to be sustained?
You can remove things permanently.
Yeah, I will say you can remove things permanently. However, as long as a seed source remains in the region, you know, you can get all the ivy out of your park, but as long as there are birds eating ivy a mile down the road, there is always a chance of a reintroduction, but it's much, much less. Like, you know, the amount of work you have to do is, you know, once you get the area clear of these things, the amount of work just drops. And it's just, you do have to do some maintenance sweeps, but it you know, they are present in the environment. And we'll talk a little bit about some that it might be possible to eliminate entirely. And the more work we do in the region, here we go. I had the next slide all lined up. So depending on the level of infestation and the awareness of it and how quickly you begin responding to that species as a problem, it is possible to eradicate a species. Some things may pop up once, people find them, get rid of them, and then it may not pop up for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, never again, or maybe 5 years later, 1 more or 5 more of these plants are found. We're on it, we got them. But unfortunately, as you can sort of see from this, awareness of what is an invasive species usually begins after the abundance has increased, the species is more widespread, and then it's going to require much more intense effort. And then at a certain point, you're controlling it. Like our goal is to make sure these plants are not, you know, impacting ecological processes in our park. You know, they may still be, you know, occasionally a stray plant shows up, but it's not negatively impacting the surrounding system. For some species we are trying to eliminate. So, and the more we can push public awareness to early recognition, the fewer of these plants there will be in the long run, and then the less work it will be for everyone. So if we could, you know, if we had realized, what was I thinking of? So some of these species, you know, Houtenia, the chameleon plant, it's not a plant I'm going to show, but it's like a ground cover, evergreen ground cover. Fish plant, it's also called. It's still not super widespread in our landscape. We've only found it in a few parks in Arlington. And if we can just make sure that nobody spreads this, shares this, and like, you know, 10 years ago when everybody started being like, wait, this plant is really awful. Yeah, the sooner we can get control of these things, the easier we have, the better chance of like really eradicating it, not just in one particular park, because you can get it in one park, but to get it in the area is a larger challenge. So we rely on volunteers. Oh, there's Joe. We rely on volunteers to tackle these things because we only have so much resources in terms of the resources that the financial and staff resources that the jurisdictions have. The other thing I will say is the more volunteers put in, as Eileen was saying, the more the jurisdictions become aware of this and feel that they need to step up and and value the work the volunteers are doing. They're like, oh, people don't just care about this enough to send a letter. They care about this enough to like get out there and do something. And so that really speaks to when they're trying to prioritize funding, that this is not something that people just abstractly care about, but this is something people are willing to put themselves out for. So the volunteering and the awareness it brings increases the resources jurisdictions have in the long run as well. So I'm not going to make you watch the Invaders rap unless at the very end we all need something to do. So it's just entertaining. These are some of like sort of my biggest challenges in Arlington and in the region. And I just want to make sure that you are, you're obviously not going to learn these species in a PowerPoint, but hopefully it sets some sort of awareness up. And then, and some of them you may already know, so maybe just adding a few more. And if you don't know what they are, just start volunteering. And after a year, you will know all of these. So, in person, hands-on. So mile a minute was a much bigger problem, I would say about 5 years ago. We've released, there's a weevil, a biological control, a weevil that is really, it's still out there in the parks. It's still a problem, but it can't get as far off the ground. Like it'll still smother a bush. It would smother a seedling, but once the tree is 5-10 feet up, it just gets, the tendrils are weaker and it's not able to get on top of that 10-12 foot high tree in the same way it used to be able to get up on top of a 15-foot high tree. So it's a really easy one to recognize. Devil's tear thumb is another name for it. It has a very perfectly equilateral triangle leaf, little thorns all the way along it, little thorns on the back side of the leaf, blueberries later in the season, late summer, and just a very distinctive leaf with those thorns. There's not really a native look-alike.
Madison Manor Park, just a little further east. No, it's not at Brandywine, but we've got that. We pulled a bunch of that.
Okay, Brandywine.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry.
No.
I was talking to Victor when I haven't muted myself.
It didn't quite seem like you were talking to me, but I was like, well, you know.
It's okay.
So Japanese honeysuckle is, this is the one that I still love a little Japanese honeysuckle on a chain link fence between houses where I can, you know, taste the nectar myself. It sort of brings back childhood, but this does become a very aggressive plant. And it's got opposite leaves. So a lot of our vines, some of our vines have, I'm sure you already had this early on, opposite versus alternate branching. This is sort of opposite leaf vine. Oval leaves. The flowers are very distinctive, the yellow or white flowers. We do not have a lot of our native honeysuckle in Arlington, but there are some differences. Our native honeysuckle has red berries and not black. Also, our native honeysuckle usually has a, often around here, it'll have a red flower. And then the topmost leaf in our native honeysuckle is a merged leaf. So instead of being two distinctive leaves, it's merged together, as you can kind of see in this picture on the lower right. Again, highly unlikely to have native honeysuckle, but it does occur in our park. So just kind of, you know, if you're not quite sure, I always say, you know, the plant will be there. You can come back and look at it at a different time of year. You can come look when it's blooming. You can come look when it's has fruit. And then if you're doing this in Arlington, please just don't go out and randomly start pulling up vines. Please contact me. I've got like 10 different sites, 11 different sites where you can do this with somebody who can say, yes, that is the right honeysuckle, go kill it, or oh, don't leave, please leave that alone. And then once you get, so you know what you're doing, I'm happy to sort of license you to take on a new area on your own, but let me know what you're doing where, please. I'm happy to support new sites, but it's good for me to know, just in case there is something like this where there does happen to be a look-alike that is native. And our native honeysuckle is very uncommon for us. I really wouldn't want to lose any plant just because we didn't know it was there. English ivy, I think everyone is familiar with English ivy. It's planted as an evergreen ground cover all over the place. You'll see it go up the trees. When it goes up the trees, the leaf shape will change. And when it goes up the trees, that's when it produces fruit. So if nothing else, if you can get it off the trees, even if you can't get it off the ground, because that's keeping it from producing fruit, and then some bird eats the fruit and then flies over to one of our parks that we've spent all this time cleaning, and then we have to deal with yet another miniature infestation. So this is one that I would tackle only in, I mean, it'll be there year round. If this is the problem you have, this is the problem you have. If you have a mix of species, save this one for the winter months. It'll be there. While we're talking about English ivy, I do want to mention that poison ivy is out there. It is native plant. It is good wildlife food. It is not invasive, however irritating it may be to people. It will grow sort of looking similar to English ivy on trees, but just make sure you know what you're dealing with. This is another one. We don't have any reason to cut poison ivy, and you're more likely to just expose yourself to it and get poison ivy. So we do want to leave the native one alone. It's a more reddish brown hairy vine versus a grayer hairy vine. And then a lot of times you can see leaflets coming off, especially if you do it during the summer months. So just be aware that this is out there. Bittersweet is another vine. There's some places, I feel like when I'm going up to the Beltway along the GW Parkway, right after you're about to get off the Parkway and get on the Beltway, in the winter, it's just like the trees are like hazy with orange, and that's all the bittersweet berries on them. This is a strangler. It'll wrap itself around a tree. It has these sort of round leaves, but they have a little tip at the end of it, and you can kind of see, like, for me, this is very distinctive. That little, it's like a sort of roundish oval leaf with a little point at the end. Another thing for me that's distinctive is when there's the little lenticels or dots. I presume you've learned about lenticels. It's associated with the respiration of the plant on the bark. So you see those little sort of dots or lenticels on it. And then if you pull it up and the roots are reddish orange, you've pulled up the right thing. If they're, I don't know, all brown or something, quick, just stick it back in and pack the dirt back around it. Porcelain berry is, again, one of these plants that looks like a grape in a lot of ways, except the fruit is very distinctive. It'll be all different shades: pink, turquoise, pale blue, dark blue, fuchsia, a mix of different berry colors. It is not wild grape. Wild grape will look like little miniature clusters. It'll look miniature purple grapes. They're each the size of like a pea or something. They're the same size as porcelain berry, but they will look like grapes. So this is one that if you're not sure what it is, you can wait till later in the season, which point it'll be easy to identify. Another tip for telling porcelain berry from native grape is that the bark of porcelain berry holds tight to the plant, whereas the bark of native grape, will start peeling off. And I didn't include it on here, but you can also look at the pith, which if you cut the plant, you look at the core of the plant, the pith, that central element of the vine. If it's white, like porcelain, it's porcelain berry. You may have to cut it in a few places to actually see a distinct color. With the grapes, it'll be like a green or brown color. But again, that sometimes this is super easy. You used to go along the W&D trail, and this would just be like mounds of this stuff along the side of it. Though we're pushing on that a lot. Dominion Power's sort of stepping up. Wisteria, lovely plant. It seems like in your yard or garden, but it is a climber and it is a spreader. And it's another strangler. It'll wrap itself around a tree. Wisteria vines can be under tension. They're pulling on the tree. They're not just growing on the tree. A lot of times they're not just wrapping around the base. They seem to start elsewhere angle over to that tree trunk, start wrapping around it, and then start pulling on the tree. And I've cut it, and it's like the tension has been released. It has compound leaves with smooth, like oval pointed compound leaves. Can be a little ripples on the edge of the leaf. And obviously very distinctive when it is in bloom. There is a native wisteria that we don't find in Arlington. I don't think it's in Alexandria, but I'm not sure. And then there's trumpet creeper, which has a red flower and a toothed leaf, but can look a little similar. So that's a whole bunch of vines. And I think I've got a few other herbaceous species, because I know for tree stewards, a lot of times the work is focusing on getting the vines off the trees. And whether that's in a cultural landscape or in a natural landscape, it's a huge priority in both sites. So garlic mustard is an herbaceous plant. I don't really worry about what it is the first year. It's a biennial plant. So the first year it just sends up a little rosette that looks a lot like a clump of violets. The second year it will send up a flower stalk, and it will have four petals in the shape of a cross. It will have a sort of toothed heart-shaped leaf. Eventually on that flower stalk, you'll get these seed pods that will drop out. This is a plant that if you can get it before it goes to seed, you really, we have a whole focus on garlic mustard usually in the spring, in April, May, because by June, well, if it's already dropped the seeds out, you could pull the plant, but there's no point. It's a biennial, it's gonna die. The goal is to get it before it can put that next patch of seeds into the soil. And this is a plant that is one of those that was studied, and they found that even though it doesn't seem like it's impacting trees in our forests, it's releasing a chemical from its roots that is suppressing the growth of other plants and suppressing particularly seed germination. So whether it's a tree seed or the seed of another native plant, it's much less likely to germinate in the presence of this plant. And then you can just end up with like a monoculture almost of garlic mustard in some areas. Another plant that we're working on everywhere is Japanese stiltgrass. This just sort of spreads to cover the forest floor. And eventually, again, it crowds out and suppresses other things. And so you end up with just stiltgrass on the forest floor. It has I can show you this slide, but quite honestly, this is one that's much easier just to see in the field, to see like the leaf. There's a little bit of a silver streak down the base of the leaf. It pulls really, really easily out of the ground. So because it's sort of up on these little stilts, and it's like smooth and soft to the touch, whereas some of our native white grass and other things like that may be growing in the same area and look somewhat similar will just feel a little rougher to the touch. They're often better rooted. Yeah, all over. And then I've got sort of two bushes. Multiflora rose can just become a thicket. And again, trees aren't, it's almost like roses can be a little rambly, and so it get a little rambly. I've seen it up on trees, definitely impacting them. So if you see something that looks like a rose in the woods, if you see something that's green in another couple weeks out in the woods, quite likely to be multiflora rose. And it's distinctive enough through the winter. The thorns angle down. We do have some native roses. They tend to have pinker flowers, and they're very uncommon. And their thorns go straight out, pinker flowers. And then again, this little like eyelash, I guess you could say, at the base of the leaf, which isn't found on our native roses.
Jen, we do have a question about multiflora rose. Are all multiple flowering roses in the same category?
So multiflora rose is a particular species. There are two native rose species that they don't have as prolific, like a bunch of little small flowers. They'll have fewer larger flowers on them. If you're talking about a rose in your garden, it is a different thing. So you might have a garden rose that has multiple flowers. There's like a pink one that's used a lot in landscaping. It is not this particular species.
Okay.
Thank you. Part of this with the multiflora, it was used as a rootstock. A lot of times roses are created by grafting different things together. And this was a rootstock that they were grafting garden roses onto. And then the rootstock grew from the root base and back true to type to the original species. And that's the way a lot of the multiflora rose got in our landscape. But it was a really healthy, sturdy, prolific thing. And they were like, oh, let's stick our weak little ornamental roses on top of this. And yeah. All right. And I think this is my last of my sort of top 10. And this is bush honeysuckle. Again, this is a plant that you wouldn't think this bush is impacting trees, but it also is releasing a chemical into the ground that suppresses the growth of other species. It has opposite branching, opposite leaves. During the summer months, you'll see little honeysuckle flowers all along it, and then red berries in the fall. It has hollow branches, so if you see something opposite growth, and especially something that greens up in the next few weeks, break off a branch, and if it's, break off a branch with moderation. Don't go around the woods breaking stuff up. But if you have this in your yard, you're not sure. I do see this in people's yards quite often. It will have a hollow stem. And again, this is one of those things where, in your yard, it may not seem like a big deal, but those berries are being spread into our natural areas where there's nobody, unless there's a volunteer, there's nobody there maintaining them. Right, so those are like sort of my top 10, 11 species that I find all over the place. Here are 20 invasive plants. They're currently for sale. Sort of addressing, the point earlier, why are these things for sale? They are, and not only are you possibly buying an invasive plant directly, there may be jumping worms or some other invasive thing in the soil with it. So just be one thing is if you're looking at buying a plant, especially if you're looking at buying it online, if you see anywhere on it that it is not allowed to be sold in the state of Missouri, or not allowed to be sold in the state of Hawaii, if it's not allowed to be sold in one state, you probably don't want it either. Buying native is a great way to make sure you don't by accident get an invasive species. And then the other thing is just there are, the master gardeners have a great website that lists, non-native, native alternatives. And also there's a lot out there that's like, there are non-native plants that are not invasive. You can find them. So you just have to do a little bit more research. Anything that's advertised as a fast spreader, prolific, you might want to take a second look at. But there are native species, and then there are other species that may not be native but are harmless. They may not be doing anything for the environment, but they're not doing anything against the environment. I have lilac bushes. I love lilac in the spring. They're not the greatest landscaping plant because of mildew and everything like that, but I have them and I would plant them in my yard just because, but I know it's not an invasive species. Again, your role as educators is key, trying to reduce the amount of these plants that get out into our environment. It's really, the more we can do, the fewer of these plants there are, the less heavy the infestation is, the easier it is to control them. And I guess I'm going to pause there. I think this slide, I sometimes give this after I've given this list of all this other stuff that's invasive. A lot of times people aren't aware that all of these species may also be issues. So I'm just going to sort of pause there and ask if there are any questions that came through since the last.
I just like to volunteer. This is Joe, that I have 6 of the top 20 on my condo's property. So it's not just the woods. that in the park that I'm looking after. It's all the stuff that my neighbors love that I really need to get rid of. And if anybody comes up with a good argument, well, I'd love to hear it. Because
Yeah,
nothing said has worked so far.
yeah, it's sort of a gradual process of changing. Unfortunately, it's a gradual process of changing people's expectations of what a landscape should look like. It's also, you know, you can produce a very tidy, manicured looking landscape with native plants. A lot of those of us who love native plants are like, oh, we want to get this like kind of wild meadow, jungle, forest thing going, but that isn't necessarily what the average homeowner wants to see. So I have seen places where people just put like a row of, it's called coral bells or alum or heuchera, and then they've got a row behind it of shadbush. Just those two species. It looks very ordered, very neat, very tidy. And people don't think of that as native plants because of the way it's ordered and structured. So you don't have to get all, you know, jumbly and use a native plant palette. But it is a slow process. Once the plants are established, you know, I'm going to go and rip all these out and put something different in. It's hard to persuade people. So it's just finding opportunities to keep advancing that conversation, you know, meeting people halfway. Sometimes there's debates about whether, you know, which native plant is the best native for a particular location. I know people who are like, oh, I want something native to southeastern slopes of the mixed mesic Piedmont forest or something. And if that's not what you're planting, it's not native enough, you know, but you know, if it's your yard and it's replacing an invasive plant and it's a cultivar, it's of a native species, it's better than what you had. And I try to really value people taking those smaller steps forward because these are landscape, like some of these spaces are natural areas, some of them are our cultural landscapes, and it's, you know, it's still providing some better value and not being a threat to our environment. So just a really brief, I sort of lost track of the time here, brief overview of what we in Arlington do, sort of a mix of things. My position exists. I'm sort of doing two jobs right now, but I hope to get back to just doing this management of invasives and natural resource management full time. We have the county has funds for invasive management. We have a whole list of sites that we've prioritized based on the ecological integrity of the site and the degree of the infestation at the site, and then the community involvement with the site. So areas where volunteers are working, that's a +1 or a +2 to the community involvement part of the package. So if you're looking to get this work done in Arlington, lots of places you can already participate, but if something's not on the list, I can tell you where it is on our giant chart of where when we will have resources to address it with contractors. But volunteering is a way to move something up a priority level. And some places can be managed by volunteers alone. So I also, so we've had a lot of successes. We've made a lot of progress. We began the program really 20 years ago. For the first 10 years, it was pretty much all volunteers and some AmeriCorps people and things like that. A little bit of staffing through the Extension Service. And then about 10 years ago, it became full-time invasive plant coordinator and dedicated funding. So that's really, I think 10 years ago, we were treating 63 acres. Now we have almost 300 acres under management. And I've really seen the progress in the parks. We haven't got them all yet. So we look at the parks, we prioritize them, we reach out to the public, and then the contractors do removal as well as the volunteers. So for us, our contractors, we have done some biological control. A lot of this is being done by Fairfax, and Arlington eventually benefits, though I am trying to reach out on a few things. So biological control, there's that weevil eating the mile a minute there, and you can see all the holes it's put in the leaf, and again really impacted that plant's ability to grow. Chemical controls is using herbicide. You can use herbicide on private property, and I believe that was covered in your little Unit 9 that I guess you read for homework. a lot of what we do is we do what's a cut stump treatment or a hack and squirt treatment, where we're not just spraying everything. If we have a big bush of invasive bush, what we do is we cut it down and we treat the stump at the base of that bush. We don't just spray everything on the leaves. We do spray if like ground cover, something like English ivy. We try to do that in the winter months when there's no other species present, at least for the first pass or two, so we can be very targeted in what we're treating. You can't really see, but that stone arrow is pointing to a single wavy leaf basket grass plant that was found at one of our parks by the contractor. And so they, of all the green things in the picture, we only actually treated this. Or in the picture below, this is in a forested area. And again, we took one particular tree. Trees can be invasive as well. And stump treated it. You see that little blue dot. So we have the funding. And then there's funding also comes in that's not just dedicated to me and part of my prioritization of parks based on those qualities I mentioned. But there's also funding coming from neighborhood conservation grants, park managers, projects by environmental services. So here's just a whole bunch of parks. If you are an Arlington resident, you may recognize some of these names. I don't remember now why I put some of them in red. Oops. And then here's some more parks where we're doing work with the contractors. And then we have our volunteers. And volunteers are doing regular events in a lot of our parks, or sometimes they're doing quarterly events in our parks. And then we also have tree stewards and other people like that have supported us with one-time events where we get a group that wants to come out and do something. And, you know, maybe I'm not able to meet them, or I am able to meet them, but there's a whole bunch of them. They need more experienced hands to guide them in a stewardship event that they're doing. So our volunteers are doing sort of tackling things at different levels. One thing they're doing is very small sites. Fillmore Park, as an example of that, to me, it was only 3 acres and 2 acres of it were just, you know, cultural landscape grass and some trees, and about, you know, maybe an acre that was more natural land and pretty highly infested with invasive plants. But volunteers just like, because it was really just an acre of land, they really were able to get it. It's gotten so much cleaner within just 2 years of work, and now they're able to stay on top of it. They've been adding some native species. Volunteers are also, you know, slowing the spread of these plants by getting ahead of the seeds going out into the seed bank. I know that, like, sometimes Joe's done this at Brandywine Castle, where they're going out and they're trying, even before they can do the real total clearing, there's sort of an advanced wave of just trying to cut the vines off the trees so they're no longer putting seeds into the soil. Some of our sites, they're working like after the contractors have done the work, and just to help keep it clean, help reduce the maintenance cost to the county of keeping these sites fairly invasive free. And then a lot of times, honestly, volunteers are doing labor-intensive grunt work to get the vines off the trees and to cut down these bushes and make our contractor dollars go further. And that's been true at every single one of these sites I've mentioned, that the volunteers have been in there doing that very labor-intensive, time-intensive work. Here's a site at Long Branch more than 10 years ago, and there's the same site today, so looking pretty good. You'll see some of these like tree seedlings are looking a little funny, these saplings, and a lot of that is the presence of invasives at the time, you know, the original work was done. It takes a while for these plants to recover. I'm just gonna really quickly, if you're interested in volunteering in Arlington, we can use you. We have an event, I would say every single weekend, sometimes twice a weekend, sometimes 3 times a weekend, and we have events during the week. So if you just Google like Arlington invasive, you'll find us, or Arlington ecology, you'll find links to invasive plants. And then once you're on this page, if you go where it says become a volunteer, click the pre-registration button, and you will see, so I'm going to just make this a little bigger. So all the sites where we are currently hosting invasive removal at least once a month. Powhatan Springs is actually a more of a quarterly thing, that they have something coming up soon. So if you want to volunteer with Joe, there's Brandymore Castle, location. If you wanted to fill out the registration form in advance for some reason, a little bit of information. Here's who signed up to volunteer. Sign up. If we have to cancel, we'll let you know. And so Long Branch, I think, is coming up sooner rather than later. So that's a little more full. And I'm just going to go back out of, oops, this. We also list our events on the county webpage, the invasive plant page. You'll see events coming up. So not just invasive removal events, but some of the other ones. And I am listing events that, we've got it now listing events that take place at Northern Virginia Regional Park sites as well as county park sites, just so that's all, or most of it is now in the same place. We still haven't quite got all the pieces lined up, but many, many, many opportunities to volunteer. And and then again, just want to thank you guys. This is an example of a really nice, I can't remember now where I took it. I think it might've been at Haley. Just a nice forest. You see there's like seedling regeneration, a clean forest floor. We're finding things like bloodroot have been spreading in our parks. Lubber Run has beautiful displays of spring wildflowers now, 15 years after serious invasive removal work was done. I've seen them spreading at Gulf Branch. I know, Joe, we've all seen the rewards of doing this work. And this isn't just for work in the forest. Again, I sometimes feel like I just the other day sent an email out, I think, to the tree stewards being like, hey, there's a holly tree in a median where there's a welcome to the neighborhood sign. I just need somebody to go out and get the vines off that one tree. So it's in the cultural landscapes as well as working in the woods. And I think with that, I'm gonna stop there and see if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, there are several questions. One is, what about bamboo? People are starting to notice it more in wooded areas around McLean and, just right next door behind your house. What do we do about that? What's going to happen with that? Fairfax County has some an ordinance that they're trying to pass, but I don't know what it says. Do you know what it would say?
Yeah, so this is again talking about what we can and cannot manage as a Dillon Rural state. About let's say 5-10 years ago, probably it was more like 5 years ago, the state of Virginia, in response to concerns, did pass a law saying local jurisdictions could pass an ordinance regarding the control of bamboo. And about at least 5, I think maybe 10 jurisdictions in the state have since passed such an ordinance. Basically, it says that you're allowed to have bamboo, but you are required to contain it on your own property, so that it's not, you can't, if it spreads from your property to other property, you're not just like, oh, no, it's a plant. That it's your bamboo and you're responsible for its containment. Unfortunately, truly containing bamboo requires digging a trench around it that's several feet deep and putting in some kind of impermeable barrier, whether plastic or metal or concrete, to keep the rhizomes of the bamboo from spreading. And so doing that can really impact tree roots. If you have trees growing where the bamboo is and you dig a trench, right through the middle of it all, 3 feet deep, you're going to sever those tree roots. So it's not always actually the best solution. We tend to just keep cutting it at the edge of our parks. Like we cut it down in our parks. Once you've cut it down, we treat it with an herbicide for the next several years to manage any resprouts. And where there's a contiguous patch of bamboo on private property, we will just always have to deal with that until the property owner eliminates the bamboo on their side. We have had places where people have we're having more and more places where we're hearing from people that like, oh, I don't actually want this bamboo on my side, and they are taking it down. But that is, again, a slow process. Sometimes that only happens when a property turns over. Fairfax did consider passing the ordinance several years ago. At the time, they decided to go with an education campaign about bamboo, asking people to sort of voluntarily manage it and educating people about, you know, if you're going to plant bamboo in the future, please put this containment barrier in. And then I think there's been, you know, maybe it hasn't been as successful as they hope. Maybe it has been successful, but they've decided to take another step. I know they are considering it again. One of the issues is, of course, if you own bamboo yourself, and there's plenty of bamboo on county property, you know, that also means that we would then be responsible for the cost of removing it if it went onto somebody else's property. And bamboo is really pricey to get out, because you can't put it in a shredder. You've got to like cut it and haul it all away. And that first getting it out is just a really bulk elimination of bamboo is expensive. So it's definitely one of the things I think Arlington may or may not consider in the future. The Forestry and Natural Resource Plan is in the draft stage. That'll go out for public engagement sometime in the spring or summer as the first draft, and I guess maybe first draft in the spring. It's an opportunity to weigh in there, and then, you know, just something that we might, you know, consider in the future. Any other, sorry, long answer about bamboo. Any other questions?
Yeah, someone wanted to know who handles invasive or coordinates invasive removal on the GW Parkway, which everyone's noticed. It's a complete
Yeah, so that is the National Park Service. That's Alex and Maria do it, Alexandra and Maria, who I, you know, have met with various regional working groups and stuff like that. As you may or may not know, the National Park Service is severely underfunded for the land they manage. And they do have, you know, a team working. They, like all of us, I think they probably are prioritizing their least impacted areas, which have, like, you know, an area where they may have more rare plants or higher species diversity. If they can't manage, they don't have the resources to manage everything. They're choosing and targeting where to manage. There's a regional group called the PRISM, the Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management, that is doing some work, and they've been a good partner to us. Like, our contractor found wavy leaf basket grass on our side, reached out to them, they got it treated on their side. So they really are trying, but they just don't have the resources. Most of what's happening along the parkway, there are volunteers working there. Glenn Tobin is leading volunteer work on the GW Parkway. Kit Britton is leading volunteer work on the GW Parkway. There's people working at Teddy Roosevelt Island, which is sort of part of that. It's a mess. They don't have the resources. I think at that level, you have to be talking to Congress. It's not something. Maybe one day when I finish Arlington, when I finish everything on county land, in my wild dreams, I will then be like, hey, let's go deal with all the mess over on the other jurisdiction. Is there some kind of agreement we could come to that would, you know, but I still haven't finished what is owned by the county. So, but I agree that they do trainings. They did a weed warrior training. During the pandemic, they will do another weed warrior training. If you're interested and you want to volunteer there, it could definitely use volunteers. And they do have a volunteer program that you can become part of and be certified with. So if that's where you're interested in working, I can connect you with Eric, Alex or Maria or Anna who work on that side of things.
I have a question about wisteria.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, you mentioned that there was a local, a native variant. Is that correct?
There is a native wisteria. It is, I don't think we have it in Arlington anymore, except where we planted it at one point at the nature center, one of the nature centers, as a sort of demonstration. So
when you
And
see it,
again, I
then
don't know if it's in our Alexandria. It might be on Fairfax.
when you see it once growing up in the top of a tree,
Mm-hmm.
and then it dies down or it's cut off and it dies, but it's left lots of little upstarts. Is that
Uh-huh.
likely to have been an invasive or
Hmm?
a native?
I'm trying to find my mistaken identity book about wisteria. There's a
Well, I
great
was thinking-
resource. There's a great resource by the University of Delaware called Mistaken Identity that I can find online and put in the chat, or at least email out to you afterwards.
Well, I've just been prompted to think of it because years ago I worked at the National Gallery briefly down in DC, and soon after the building was built in the 30s, they planted wisteria, and now it's 2 blocks long, grows up over the wall that that guards the windows. It's anyway, and it's a magnificent display when it blooms. And I'm now curious to pursue it. You needn't pursue it. I'm just really curious if that would likely to have been a native, or in that era, would it have been a nasty one?
I'm guessing it was the non-native wisteria, but I don't want to speak for that without seeing the plant. There are, if you like Google native versus non-native wisteria, somewhere out there, there's a key that you could use.
Okay, I will pursue it. You're needing,
Yeah.
but thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. I'm guessing it probably was the non-native, but it's always good to double check, because you can't. I mean, I will say for most of these plants, if you're wrong and it turns out to be a native, if you just cut it and you don't use herbicide, you'll have another chance at it. It may very well regrow, but a lot of the natives don't regrow as aggressively.
So a plant like wisteria, for example, would have been brought in for the reasons you mentioned early on, that it was attractive, or it was somebody liked it when they saw it in a stately home or whatever. And so they said, oh, let's have some more like that.
Yeah, of course. And it's a beautiful plant. It looks lovely on your pergola. If that's all you have and you don't have a natural landscape to concern yourself, I suppose it would be okay. Yeah. Though I think sometimes people do find like it's eating their house. A lot of these species, we have to remember that stuff that's native for us is invasive in other countries. I was in Ireland and they were like, oh, these rhododendrons, and they were complaining about our native rhododendron. So it's just like, it's not that the plant is a bad plant. It's just not in a place where it's part of this whole community. And, some systems are more fragile. Some island systems are more fragile inherently, but a lot of it's just that all the partners and the herbivory and everything, that the competition that the plant evolved with is absent, and it just expands to fill the space. I am able now to see the chat. So the right way or wrong way to remove invasives from your own yard or the neighbor's yard. In your own yard, I would say the best way is just to volunteering at some events. You will learn how to remove all these plants, but there are also a lot of resources out there, for any specific plant. There's tons of information. If you want to shoot me a thing, I can send you like, oh, here's 3, if you have garlic mustard, here's 3 recommendations on how to remove it. If you have ivy, here's 3 recommendations on how to remove it, or 3 resources or something like that. Definitely, yeah, in your neighbor's yard, if they ask for help and advice. GW Parkway, it's the National Park Service, and they, like I said, they could use the help. Controlled burns. I actually had controlled burns listed as an option on my various ways to remove and deal with invasives, including like mechanical or biological control, but Arlington does not allow controlled burns currently. We would not be really looking at that for invasive management, but it's also used as a meadow management tool. Again, Arlington is so small and urbanized that it's very difficult to do controlled burns without having to answer the phone 10,000 times and explain that it is a controlled burn. So we currently are just mowing our spaces rather than burning them. And yeah, again, those controlled burns at Huntley are also a meadow management tool as well as an invasive tool.
a couple more questions. How do you remove kudzu vine? And someone has noticed that lesser celandine is coming out now all over.
Yes. So kudzu, how do you remove it? Again and again, you cut it and you cut it and you cut it. You might find where the base mass of the root is. It depends on how much soil disturbance you can tolerate or the site can tolerate. If you can pull out smaller vines, just pulling them out. Sometimes there's just like this, almost like a tuber base root, serious root mass underground. I've known volunteers to hack at it with pickaxes to get in there. But again, like if that was on a steep slope, you may not want to cause that level of soil disturbance. It is a plant that if you're using herbicide, there are herbicides that are extremely effective against kudzu that you don't have to use at the normal concentration levels. There's an herbicide, the base chemical name, it's not a brand name, is called Transline, I think. And you can use that at like 0.5%. So sort of you might want to look for an herbicide that targets, mentions kudzu as what it targets, because then you can use a much lower concentration, fewer chemicals, and get a good treatment. And that's some of the ways we've gotten control of kudzu in the county is because of that. But there is still kudzu. Yeah, there's still kudzu. And we're always going to be working on that, I think. And yeah, lesser celandine is everywhere along the 4-mile run in our stream valleys. If you have a single plant, or just, very small few clumps, you can sort of hand dig it out, being careful to get the roots and the tubers and the bulbils. But yeah, we're working on it. I don't think we'll ever get all the celandine out of Arlington. But it is a carpet in some of our areas, and spreading, as Joe was saying, spreading north into the Brandymore Castle sign of Huntley Meadows. The places where we've been doing management of it, there is less celandine. There is less celandine along Windy Run. There's less celandine along Gulf Bridge. There's less celandine among Zachary Taylor and Donaldson Run. There's less celandine in Barcroft and like a lot of the sites where we're doing spring sweeps, the crew is out there, but where we're not treating it, it is just a dense. Yeah, it depends. Again, if you have digging it up by hand is pretty labor intensive. It's okay if you just have a little tiny bits of it, like Nora was mentioning at Lacey Woods. But if you have a carpet of it, digging it up by hand, there's these little tubers associated with it. You almost have to like filter the soil or take out the soil itself. And either one of those is just so intensive of volunteer time that we do usually treat it with herbicide. Or you can go to Lacey Woods. Because that's a place where it's just a few plants just starting to become established there. One of the great things about our stewards and our volunteers who are focusing on sites is that they're seeing this stuff before we have a carpet of it, when it still is something that, hey, we can get in here and get this under control before we end up with needing to use herbicides or, before it spreads.
Yeah, Jennifer,
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to put in a plug to everyone that they should look at removing and getting involved in removing invasives as a cycle. That the best way that I have found, like I started this 18 years ago when I took tree stewards. And there was suddenly I learned that ivy that I had purchased and planted around my tree when I moved in was not good for it. So, I started working in Lacey Woods. And at that time it was with Jan Farragut, like 3 people back from your position, and learned a lot about what to do. And we had big work parties once a month for like 5 years. And it was really fun. I got to know a lot of people. I got to know a lot about what you want to do to clean it. And Lacey Woods is now pretty clear.
It really looks good.
And we look at all these little things. But you know, I started out just being the gopher on these invasive work days. And then you learn, and then pretty soon you're able to say, oh, I'm going to work at my park, like Eileen did at Timber Branch, and then start getting others involved. And it's great because once you're approved and Jen or whoever is doing the program knows that they can trust you, that you're not going to pull up the wrong seedling, you can really, you know, back when I was working, I'd have a horrible work week and I just show up there on Saturday morning and remove invasives because it was such a mental health thing.
It's
And I
very
think
therapeutic.
Yeah, this is one of the things you can really make a difference at. So, you know, get involved, just show up. If you're from Alexandria, give Eileen a call or show up there Sunday or come to the Arlington ones. And then once you feel pretty confident, we'll help you get another program going. I mean, Joe's running hers every month and we're more than
Twice
happy.
a month now. I think
get you
Joe's doing
going.
it twice a month now because she's
Yeah.
unstoppable. But yeah, and it's like, and now Nora is doing, like, she's got Lacey Woods in a really good place. You're doing like a maybe quarterly event or something
Right.
like that, like
Right.
for maybe 3 or 4 or 5 a year, just to kind of keep it clean and just sweeping whole sections of the park. The other thing I would say is, you know, whether it's your own yard or a park near yourself, like set yourself these goals. I know like Steve Young, who sort of taught me invasive stuff 20 years ago, you know, his original goal was to clear this one like bench. And then maybe he was going to clear this one tree. And then, you know, he could see the progress. So it does seem like it's never ending. It's always there, but you do see the progress. But you do have to kind of keep at it, you know, but it is rewarding. You get to be outside in the woods. You get to learn about native plants. You get to, like, you know, see hawks or find frogs or, and just, you know, look up and see the tree, see the progress. Either I always try to remember to look back and see the progress we've made as well as the mess ahead of us on some of these sites. So yeah. Any other?
Yes, you've mentioned in many of the places when you have ivy going up a tree that one needs only to cut it at the bottom and remove any girdling roots, etc. But up above the height you can reach, you know, 6 to 20 feet, will that really die?
It will really die. Now, sometimes if you have a really mature ivy vine that's so embedded in the bark, it can be, you really do want to make sure you cut all the way through the vine in multiple places. And sometimes if the tree is almost like grown around it, it can be difficult to see where that vine is rooted down into the soil. So I have seen a few cases where some trees have almost like engulfed the vine that emerges on it further up. But it will die. The one thing I will say is if you cut it in late November, December, you know, you create that gap, that 6-inch gap, that 2-foot gap, whatever it is, because you don't need to necessarily rip. If it's not stuck on the bark, that's fine. Go ahead and take it off. But if it's embedded in the bark, you don't necessarily need to rip it, all of it off the tree.
Well, no,
just create
only
that
2
gap.
years, only 2 years since we made the cut. This is obviously personal property, but I look around, our neighborhood is awash.
If you cut it 2 years ago, like I would say, if you cut it in December, sometimes you won't see an impact until April because the plant is fairly dormant and you can't tell that it's, you know, dying. But you should certainly have seen something within within 6 months, you know, even supposing you cut it in November and it was a really long, cold spring or something. So it must be, there must be another vine somewhere on the tree. And like I say, sometimes they can kind of hide.
We had a message for the tree stewards about a group, I think it was different from tree stewards, that was asking for people to notice where there were lots of vines encumbering trees and report this to an organization that would then try to, maybe this was just for public lands. And that's my question. Does anybody remember this? Because where I live, there are lots and lots of trees on private properties that you can see are being huge ivy vines all up into the canopy.
This may be a project that took place in, Nova Tree Rescuers. There was a similar project in Tacoma Park where people were offering to volunteer on their neighbor's private property. I don't know, assume Nova Tree Rescuers are similar. They're going around the neighborhood being like, hey, I noticed you have vines on your tree. Would you like me to remove it? And if the person said yes, they, you know, went back there with their clippers or saw. If the person said, I'm not sure, they would give them information. And then if they said no, okay, you know, thanks for your time. So there are people going out now to try to tackle this, like for people on private property. We don't, the county does not have such a program. I think this is better as almost a neighbor to neighbor, volunteer to neighbor project. The county doesn't want to get involved on going on people's private property. But
yeah, I would say go to Plant Nova Native, and they've got tree rescuers, but the reality is there are at least 100 trees out there being reported for everyone who says, oh, sure, I'll do it. So, and I would remind all of the tree stewards that you got that information on choking hazard in your little bag. And that can be given to your neighbors and talked with them. It explains how to remove ivy and other vines. So,
and I have a stack of them if you need more. If you give them all away, I can.
Yeah, we've got a lot of them. So anyway, I think we're running toward the end of our time, but
I went
thank
a lot
you.
longer than I thought I would. I was like, oh,
Well,
I'll just probably
that's
talk for like half
okay.
an hour, maybe 45 minutes. And then I, you know.
Yeah, well, it's always a topic that gets going, and hopefully you'll see a lot of new tree stewards out there soon. And we'll see you either at the planting coming up on Saturday or Sunday at the removing invasives. So thank you very much, Jen.
Yeah, well, thank you all too. I really, again, appreciate your, you know, volunteering to volunteer. I don't know how to say it. I'm getting paid to do this. You guys are doing this, you know, as volunteers, and that means a ton. It means a lot.
Yeah.
So thank you all.
Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, everyone. I'll see you next week. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.